Stone. Some darkness was about Will, as he sat in a booth at the Dolphin. 1109897 Ontario Inc. had little for him to do. The cigarettes were gone, the punishment was gone, and the weed was gone. He didn't even have to collect rent on the buildings he and Cobb owned. Mr. Willis had set everything up on automatic withdrawal. He and Mr. Willis never went to lunch anymore, and they rarely spoke on the phone. Everything had leveled off. Mr. Willis had inquired about the dispersals from the primary trust, but Will just told him that the primary trust managers had given him no explanation. "It's all smoke and mirrors with the primary trust," he told Mr. Willis. He had no ideas on where to take 1109897 Ontario Inc. He felt impotent and disconnected from the world in a way that frightened him. His hair was unkempt again, and he grew another thin beard. He couldn't understand how the vision had brought him to the place he now occupied. He sat in the Dolphin for hours every day, reading newspapers and watching the news on Fred's TV. The world was little more than a corporation. He realized in those weeks of idleness. The world was so dark. The oxygen market was a reality. People would soon pay for oxygen. His economics were sound. His vision was sound. He could barely live with himself. A corporation could kill 1,000 people. The profit motive was so legitimized in culture that no amount of scrutiny by law could find any predetermination in death by corporation. No grounds for second-degree murder either, because intent was nearly impossible to prove. And accidental death and negligence became matters of money, not of morality, or intention, or interpretation. These bad spirits could float through the earth, leaving havoc in their paths, and, when confronted by their actions, dissolve and avoid the liability. Ghosts. The law was the only thing that animated legal entities, and a corporation was nothing but a legal entity. And, by virtue of this nepotism, corporations were given special, family treatment by the courts. They could create a world where oxygen was a future commodity. There was no liability for them. It was the most brutal occupation of the human imagination in the history of civilizations. The modern economy, the most superstitious of cultures in the history of people, thrown into calamity by the slightest change in the remotest parts of the world, immune to neither acts of God nor the chaos created by attempting to understand acts of God for the purpose of risk analysis, thus creating the added burden of foreknowledge of misery, which struck Will as black prophecy and the grim documentation of people without vision, the walking dead, those incapable of participating in the oldest form of democracy known to man, the heart's consent, for want of a heart long since deconstructed by the infection of imperfect and limiting knowledge. A knowledge not born of the heart and mind, but born of the mind's minions, the endless statistics, the endless actuarial reports of bureaucrats, the endless search for control over reality by a species incapable of controlling itself, and it all resulted in the endless presence of fear. There was nothing underwriting the larger risks of the species. The gamble that the rush to fulfill the human potential dream might dilapidate the resources required to simply live, which, to any functioning economist's mind, and Will's mind was functioning, was no household, no oeko at all, but a prison for possibility, a place without spirit and vision, which play a part in defining the circumstances that are then gathered for statistical analysis. Will closed the newspaper and stared blankly at Dorothy. It had become dangerous for him to look at the world. The lightness and optimism that had commenced his journey to his vision had become as heavy and immovable as stone. It was an unsettling thing to see the same season twice under the ambiguity of the same vision, and spring was upon him. There was a nagging sense of redundancy and futility in his life. The horror of it came crashing down on him in some burst of feeling and thought that connected in some part of him that had been atrophied by dormancy and awakened by necessity, which was the great engine of any economy. whether it be the economy of spirit, the economy of mind, the economy of memory, the economy of feeling, or the economy of earth and man. It was all necessary. The fear dictated it. There was no certainty, and where there is no certainty, there is no closure. And where there is no closure, there is unrest. And where there is unrest, there is dubious necessity in the economy. The same dubious necessity that had sealed him up in an attic room, season after season, musing on the meaning of a 15-second vision that startled him awake and defined nearly a year of his life. His internal economy was in turmoil, and in that turmoil he saw the turmoil of the world, of its economy, the loss of all reasoning, the hardening of the imagination, which was fueled, to Will's mind, by the delicate human hope that the light of the species will prevail, not once and finally, but daily and forever, against the forces of ignorance and fear. He was losing his faith in himself and his faith in the world, faith that the experts would lead them all to a promised standard of living. How could there be any standard of living when there was no standard of existence? To find and take from the seen and unseen worlds all the things they needed to get along on this planet: grains, trees, water, air, energy, and that these things could magically be fabricated by the experts, who were so far removed from the ordinary person in their specialization that it seemed like magic somehow. The unverifiable guidance of seers who took counsel only with one another, a petri dish in which the hubris of the species was determined by a handful of people, as it had been since the beginning of time, with the unwashed masses assuming the liability of their ambitions. Crack the atom, find the energy in hydrogen, patent the human genome, alter the structure of vegetables and their seeds, get the canals on Mars photographed, secure oxygen, and the whole mad factory of belief in the future, in the possibility of the species. But they screwed it all up somehow, Will felt. When things went wrong, and they seemed to be more and more to him, the whole species tore up an invisible lottery ticket and cursed itself a fool for believing in the first place. It was an attack on the idea that there is enough to go around, that the simple bickering in the world over resource and ownership, education and equality, need and ability, fear and hope, and all the things that dance on the head of fear's pin, meet to determine the outcome of circumstance. And many times as of late, at least to Will's sensibilities, the light of the species had been mocked by the universe, and the experts had been left holding hope's corpse with stupid and childish expressions, seeming to wordlessly say, "I didn't do it." It seemed like the whole species, the whole tribe, the whole human race was going to face fate together, and that reckoning might not be the optimist's revenge, indeed far less. And it made Will feel sick. It was to him as if some mad Frankenstein dream was coming true. And they had all aided in its development by contributing to the modern world with their trades and taxes. And with the surplus of labor, they had managed to bring a dream into the world. And it was not a pretty dream, not a human dream. And it was positively paranoid. It didn't matter whether it was the Inquisitions, the Crusades, the breaking and reforming of Chinese dynasties, or the puritanical practice of modern capitalism. It was just clear to Will that day, more so than any day of his life, that when people get together and form a group big enough to create anonymity, people would be sacrificed. And really, what did it matter if it was for the one true God, or the good of the empire, or the manifestation of the full possibility of the species? They were still sacrificing people. The only real fear in the known universe was their fear, the perfectly pure and childlike fear of unstructured imagination, a purposeless existence, so fundamental in its representation of fear's true ability to destroy everything in its path, that even pursuit of proof of purposelessness was purpose enough, proof that their existence was not the product of the random. He had to hold to his original vision's course, whatever that might be, and he had to because it was a question of liability. He had been given the vision which, according to Cobb, was a sacred thing, and the responsibility of the seer. This was the real economy, he concluded, the economy of vision, the internal workings of a human being, with no boundaries on vision but the boundaries of whatever gave people vision, whatever created real things within people, as real things were created in the world by nature. He realized he had to talk, and with Robert Polsky all but disappeared, he knew there was only one person he could talk to, and that person was Patty. He stood and dropped a few dollars on the linoleum table, between the dirty dishes with egg yolk and bread crust and tomato slices on them. He left the Dolphin and trotted across the street. He went down the stairs, down the dingy hallway, and knocked on Patty's door. There was no movement on the other side. Walking the dog, maybe, he thought. He knocked again, with more force, and the door pushed open a couple of inches. "Patty," he said. There was no answer. He pushed the door all the way back and saw Patty on the floor, a kind of purple color, with his eyes looking hollow and glassy, like things a taxidermist might use. Oh. He walked into the bathroom, following the sound of a soft whimpering. The dog was on the floor, languid and sad. He hardly moved, hardly looked up at Will. He left the bathroom and looked at the things on the coffee table, looking for that thing that people leave behind to give some half-assed insight into their state of mind just before they did it. And he found it, right there on the coffee table, right beside the big envelope. It said, "Dear Will, there are some days that I see no beauty in the world, and on these days I'm okay. But there are other days when there is beauty in the world, and on these days I'm bad. I have decided that I want to end the journey of my life. I have not accomplished anything spectacular. I leave nobody behind. My struggle in the world has not amounted to much, but what there is I want you to have. You have given me some secret hope in my life and in my journey to death. You made me consider things I had allowed myself to forget, and for that I'm thankful. I love you. Your friend, Patty Pape." Will opened the big envelope and it was full of money. There was about $80,000 by Will's quick count. He fell to the floor and curled up in the fetal position, softly whimpering, a human imitation of the dog's behavior in the bathroom. And he stayed like that for a long time, longer than he could gauge, and then he fell asleep. Cobb woke him up. "Patty loved you?" "Apparently so," Will said, and he sniffled and coughed, and he sat himself upright on the floor. "It's okay, Will," Cobb said. "He was dying anyways." "AIDS?" "Cancer." "He never told me." "No matter. He traded well for the Queen. He kept his word. He had honor." Cobb grabbed the big envelope and removed $12,000. "This is mine," he said. "I loaned him $12,000 when I got out of prison." "I was going to put it all in the company anyways," Will said. "What do you want to do?" Cobb asked. "Well, we're not going to burn Patty." "No," Cobb said, "we can't burn Patty." "What then?" "Nothing. We do nothing," Cobb said. "Grab the note and the cash. We don't want to be questioned about this." "What about the dog?" "They'll take care of him when they find him," Cobb said. "They'll kill him," Will said. "Maybe," Cobb said, "but there's nothing we can do about that. If the dog's gone, they'll know the scene's been tampered with. We have to leave the dog." They left the apartment. Will's mind recited: a stream, a bright light, a crow, a black bear, a crucifix, a stone, and purple flowers. And again like a mantra, and for a while like that, as he lay on his mattress in the attic, staring at the ceiling. A bright light, a crow, a black bear, a crucifix, a stone, and purple flowers. End of chapter.